Hey everybody, I'm here today with Alison Wilcox, and she is from New York. And what is so funny about that, Alison, you don't know this because you and I don't even really know each other except for Facebook, but I have a very dear childhood friend, and she lives in New York, in Connecticut, in Bethel, Connecticut, and her name is Alison.
Oh,
So I guess every person that I'm going to be friends with in New York, if it's a female, it's going to have to be an Alison.
well, that's great. Well, it's a great way for us to start out then.
Yes. Thank you so much for messaging me and wanting to be on my podcast, video cast, and talk about your story. And just tell me a little bit about what you do. And you said you're from Buffalo, New York?
Yes, originally from Canada, and I immigrated to Buffalo, New York 18 years ago. Actually, when my son was 1 day old from the hospital, because I was marrying an American who lived in the Buffalo, New York area. And I am CEO of the Girl Scouts of Western New York. And also how we met each other is I'm also working on a book and a blog in my personal time, just about helping people. It's really like a way for me to share my own story, but just helping people with resilience, adventure, living a life with purpose. And it does really speak a lot to also how you deal with loss and use that to live your life more intentionally.
That I love how you just said that, more intentionally. But let's go back to that 1 day old. You had a 1 day old baby and you traveled.
Yes.
That should be your book done right there, Resilient.
Yes.
So you were at the hospital and y'all just decided when you got out to come to the United States?
Well, it was my husband was the Buffalo area, and I was still in Toronto, and because of healthcare and everything going on, that's where I was working and living. So it just made more sense for me to stay living there, just and take advantage of the fact that I had the healthcare system, give birth to him there, and then immigrate. So, and at the time, the border was a little different. You didn't need passports yet. So just with a certificate from the hospital, they let us in the country. And yeah, so, and actually the title of my blog is Birth of Adventure, and it deals a lot with motherhood as well.
I was about to ask, because that's pretty amazing. I can't even get past that, because I know after I've only given birth to one child, and I know after that happened, there's no way I could have traveled the next day. But yes. Good for you. Well, tell us about your job right quick at the Girl Scouts. That's awesome, because I just immediately thought, here you are in New York with boxes and boxes of cookies around you.
Yes, I pretty much am definitely the person you could go to if you wanted to find Girl Scout cookies. I always know where they are and when they're going to be on sale. And I just love working for this organization. I started back in 2010 and in an earlier role as a senior director of program, and worked my way up in the organization. And I have always been dedicated to helping empower girls and women. And just knowing the majority of all women leaders were once Girl Scouts, it just gives me a lot of purpose to make sure that every girl has the opportunity to live out her potential.
I love that. So you've been with them since 2010.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Well, and I'm going to make sure I've got your cell phone number so I can text you if there's any extra boxes of cookies laying around, and I'll give you my address down here in Central Texas.
Perfect.
Well, you had, I think, originally signed up when I was Smilecast. I was just the podcast. And then I had kind of rebranded myself to Think Theo and decided to focus more specifically on grief and complicated grief. And so you messaged me, and then you sent me an email, and I've read it several times. And I can't imagine, by the time you were 35, you'd already lost almost everyone in your family. I mean,
I have a really large family. So when I mentioned my siblings, I still have many living siblings. We grew up in a household with 8 siblings, and I have a 9th one that we didn't grow up in the house with, but is also related to us. So I still have many family members, and I was adopted. My mom remarried, and I was adopted by another dad. So I still have a dad, but I did lose my birth father when I was a baby, and lost my mother in my early 30s, and 2 of my brothers. And those really helped me kind of see the difference between grief that I would say is complicated, where there was a lot of unfinished business or really unresolved feelings around that, versus the ones like my brothers or grandparents where there was no lingering issues. And so it was very, very different when the grief feels here, you just miss the person, versus you're grieving, but there's so many other feelings that are coming up around it just because of the relationship that you have with that person or other factors.
You just totally defined it. And I get asked this a lot, and I'm going to do a whole video cast just explaining this. But everybody's like, what is complicated grief? I don't understand. You know, people like just very simple explanations to figure things out. And the best way that I have found to explain it is very similar to what you just said. With I don't want to say any death is normal, but with a normal death or funeral, you'd go to the funeral, you'd return to work that afternoon or maybe in the next few days, and you would get back to your life and you would miss the person, but you would still be able to function normally. But with a complicated grief, either in how you're mourning and how you're grieving or how it happened, you can't get back to normal life. You don't know if you ever will. Everything is disrupted. There's no way you could go to work in 2 days. So, you know, like with mine, I took 2 months off, and part of that was family leave to take care of my dad. But the other part of it was I was not mentally there. I was a school teacher of high school students. There's no way I could have stood in front of a high school class and taught one thing. So that's a great way to explain it with, like, I hate to say normal death, but with a death that maybe is a usual thing, you know, you can get back to life. But with a complicated death in the way that you're dealing with it or the way that it happened, there's no way to get back to normal life anytime soon. And most of the time needing professional help for that. Mm-hmm. And so take me back. What started it all? You know, I know about you were adopted and your birth father had passed, and your birth mother remarried fairly soon. Mm-hmm. You know, and so then they adopted a lot of children, you had said.
Yes. So with my birth father, because he passed away when I was 6 months old, I never really knew him. So grieving wasn't very normal. I just kind of grew up my whole life knowing that there had been a father, but I was adopted by my new father. And, you know, my name was changed and I was just part of the family with everyone else. And I had an older sister. So the two of us, you know, we were aware that we had a different dad than all of our siblings. But growing up, it wasn't really something I thought about. It wasn't until I became a parent myself. And for that first 6 months where I had my baby, I just kept thinking, wow, like this was someone who loved me. And I couldn't imagine not being there for my baby for the rest of their life and that they wouldn't know me. And so I really realized like what that bond was and what I'd lost. And I started learning more about people who were adopted. And because I was really raised by two parents who loved me, and I still have my biological mom, it wasn't the same as other people who have been adopted, but I related with some of it, which was around this feeling of, I realized like as a child, I sometimes would wonder, what would my life have been like if my father hadn't passed away? And then I realized that grieving him was complicated for me because first of all, like I don't even have any memory of this person. Our family was cut off from any of his biological relatives. So I did not know my biological grandparents or my aunts and uncles until very recently. And I can talk a little bit about that. So basically it was this phantom kind of person. And neither of my parents really talked much about it. I think it was one of those things, there was a picture of him up on the wall and we knew he existed, but it wasn't really something where he was really alive to me. And so when I got older and realized that what that bond was and what I had lost, I did feel some grief for what could have been there, but it was so complicated because if I wished for him to be there, it meant that my other siblings that my parents had after they got married wouldn't have existed. So it felt like a betrayal to my adopted dad and a betrayal to my siblings if I really let myself grieve and mourn the loss of my father.
Yeah. So, gosh, so you put your grief on hold, you delayed it, or just maybe thought, which I've been told is not a good thing to do, but how old were you at this time? You're in your growing up years?
When he passed away?
After when your because you were just a baby when he passed
Yes.
away, right? And then,
Yeah.
so you don't really ever remember a time where you didn't just have, like, what did you call it? Just the mystery
Yes. Yeah. It's kind of like a phantom dad, really.
phantom dad, or, but then when you really started, after you had your child, that's when you start feeling that emotion. The exact same when I had my daughter, I'm like, wow, I never thought my parents loved me this much.
Yes.
You
Absolutely.
realize how much they love
Yeah.
you when you have your own. But what you said about you just couldn't grieve because you felt like it was a betrayal. And I felt like I couldn't grieve because I was taking care of my dad and I didn't want him to see me crying. So I just had to watch him cry. So I was putting mine off too. It's funny that grief is like a culmination of all these emotions that we feel like that we've got to almost be in a room by ourselves to feel.
Absolutely.
That is so, we just hit on something, or at least it did for me. When you said that, I just immediately related to you. I was like, I couldn't grieve either. And yours was a lot more, a lot more people kind of, you felt looking at you if you did. And mine was just my dad. I felt like because of how the accident took place and he being involved and the guilt and everything going through his mind, and he has dementia. So that all was coming into play. I felt like I could not grieve in front of him, and I didn't. So was it this way for you? The more I put it off, the easier it got to put it off and not with it until I got into this book or into something where I'm trying to tap into that to help others. And it's like the wave they talk about was like a monsoon.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's so true. And it really is those times. And I know I'll talk a bit about my mom as well, losing her, which was a very different experience since she, raised me. And that was a very different experience. But I always found as soon as I was alone, that's when I could really feel it. But I would definitely be just putting on a bit of a show for everybody else and just trying to keep it together and take care of everyone else when other people are around. But as soon as I was alone, those were times where I could really sit and reflect.
And I would look forward to the times that I could grieve. I would actually look forward to it. I'd be like, oh my gosh, I think this afternoon when daddy lays down for a nap or a rest, I could go get in the car and go to the cemetery and be by myself. I never got to be at the cemetery by myself. So I looked forward to the times to grieve, but at the same time, I had a lot of angst, a lot of anxiety about it. Same thing as writing the book. So that's a great segue. Tell me about this book that you have decided to do and your blog.
Yes. So the blog is called Birth of Adventure, and I call it that because my son, I found out I was pregnant with my son when I was in New Zealand. So thousands and thousands of miles away. And I just I was recovering from a hang gliding accident. So I was stuck in New Zealand for a while in surgery in the hospital, found out I was pregnant, had to call we weren't yet married yet, my boyfriend at the time, now husband, over the phone from New Zealand, and decided that I really wanted to have him and be a mom. I was 28. I was like living all over the world, not yet ready necessarily to settle down. But I just felt like, this kid wants to be born. I just feel it in my bones. So, and then just like we were saying, ended up moving to America. So I called it Birth of Adventure, but and it talks a lot about family, but it's also around that resilience, living intentionally. And I think the complicated grief part of it is, I feel that when you lose someone really close to you, it can really help you have a better understanding about this is not a dress rehearsal. It's our only life. And I think living really intentionally and making sure your relationships are complete with people. How are you living your purpose? Those are all the things that were really important to me. So when I heard your focus, I just thought it's such an important thing, and I really related to that. But my blog will also include parts of travel. So my son is now graduating high school, and he's planning a gap year in Australia, living his own adventure. And so I was really grappling after the pandemic. I was thinking, wow, I used to write, I used to travel. I've been focusing on being a mom, being a wife, running an organization. but what's going to happen when he moves off? And so I really thought about, now is my time to get back into also myself. So I started working on preparing to launch the blog. And then the book just deals with some different chapters around resilience. And my working title right now is called Pick Up the Glove, but it's basically just around how you can deal with challenges that are thrown at you, but how you can like also positively cultivate your resilience by taking on things out of your comfort zone, so that when those really big momentous occasions come, you've already really stretched yourself out of your comfort zone and you're much more resilient and able to handle challenges.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So first of all, let's say comfort zone is not hang gliding for me. I'm terrified of heights. When you said hang gliding, I just immediately picture, now I have this friend in New York who has Girl Scout cookies and she hang glides. And I've already put you in that box.
I failed at hang gliding. It was my only time and I will never do it again. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay. That's all I need to know. That's another podcast we will do, and I'll hear all about that. But so Birth of Adventure, that's great because you've got your son who now is going to Australia. Please ask him. I'm dying to go to Australia, and I will go one day, I promise, myself. But I want to go to that zoo so bad. That Australia zoo. It's supposed to be the best in the world, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the zoo. I'll definitely ask him about it. He knows way more than I do, but I'm really fascinated as well. And I asked him, okay, well, I'll plan a trip to come see you. And
Yes.
he said, no, this is my trip. And so that's when I decided, you know what, I'm going to plan a trip. So I'm going to go to Scotland next year. And I'm going to include that I'm going to include that in the blog, but he's independent. And he said, this is where I want to go. And if you try to visit me, it'll cramp his style of it because he won't know where he's going to be at any given time. And he doesn't want to have to worry about that. So he said, just let me go. It's very nerve-wracking to send him that far away.
Oh yeah, that's majorly out of your comfort zone, not to mention his. And comfort zone, that's something I'm learning. It's so easy, especially with you and I and what we're doing right now with the book and public speaking, blogging. I haven't gotten into the blogging yet, but the comfort zone is where I want to stay. I love just my regular routine, nothing, nothing bothering that. And as soon as things that I want to do get me out of the comfort zone, I realize if I'm going to do this, I have to step out. And so that whole comfort zone thing, you just hit the nail on the head with me, because I find myself, I'm 49 years old. I'll be 50 next year. If I don't start doing these things that I've talked about that I'm going to do, it's not going to happen. And this, when I did start to focus on this, of course, my mother's accident was July of 2019. So I like to think of that as my birthplace for this, but I've always wanted to write a book, and I was going to write a book about my mom. So now it's just kind of all just merging together. My work, hearing people's stories like yours, doing all the complicated grief research. And that leads me into my next question for you. Had you ever heard the word or the term complicated grief before?
I haven't heard it put that way, but as soon as you expressed that, that's immediately what I thought. I thought, wow, that's what I have.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. That's why I'm doing this, because after that happened with me, I had a counselor that I'd been seeing for 18 years, just, wellness checks for the brain. She was always great to talk to. She'd helped me through a marriage and blended family counseling. She became a friend. And I went to see her probably once a week, twice a month. I'd miss a few here and there. Over 18 years, I saw her. And after my mom's accident, literally that night that it happened, I was texting with her. And she gives me those few words of wisdom, and it got me through. And then I went to see her once a week and took my dad with me to see her for about an hour a week after that. And then she was calling my dad to do the mental health, checks over the phone. And I was still seeing her, but she taught me so many things. And the reason I'm saying saw her and she taught me is because I don't see her anymore, because February of 2020, she died suddenly. So
Sorry.
thank you. I lost my mom July of 2019. And then second in line for advice was Gail. And
Wow.
on February, I think 10th it was, of 2020, I was teaching a class and I got a text and I just looked, and the person didn't realize how close I was. And the first thing they said is, did you know Gail passed away? And I'm just like, what? And I had to go get a substitute to come in my class. I lost it. But I feel like I'm carrying the torch now with this book for my mom and for Gail, because the story needs to be told. And Gail looked at me and said, you have complicated grief. And when she put a name to it and she gave me some books on it, I was like, oh my gosh, thank God there's a name for it. And I feel like I was going nuts. And I thought I was losing my mind. And I realize now, because it has a name, and she always said, when you can put a name to something, it really helps your body and your mind. So that's why I asked you, had you ever heard of it before? Because I, of course, had not. But when I was telling her what I was experiencing, and like I hurt my arm and had to go get stitches, I couldn't function. It's like all my motor skills were off. I had a little wreck in my car, all these weird things. I couldn't function normally. And she just said, well, you're in complicated grief, like just as normal for her to say. And I was like, oh my gosh. So that's what it is. So explaining that to somebody is difficult, because it's almost like, well, it's exactly as it sounds. It's grief, but it's complicated. Maybe in the way you're taking it after the death, or in the way it happened. So what happened to you? What happened? Like when you read what I was doing or saw it on our Facebook group, Speaker Sisters, you saw complicated grief. What led you to think that is what you had?
Yes. And I'm really sorry for all of your losses.
Thank you. And I'm sorry for yours. I'm sorry I didn't say that sooner. I immediately get with somebody like you, and we have that immediate connection. And I almost feel like we've known each other forever.
I know. Yeah. It's so great to talk with you.
It is. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances, but at least we're talking so that it'll help other people.
Yes. And really, I think death is one of the hardest things for us to go through, even though it's the most common thing that I think we all go through. It's something that happens to every single person. Everyone deals with it, but I think it's one of the most difficult things to lose a loved one.
It is. It is. And it's so funny. My husband always makes a joke, if somebody's like really worked up about something and freaked out about it. Our daughters, we have 3 daughters together. And he would always look at us and say, none of us are getting out of this alive. If you look at it in that sense, none of us are going to get out of this thing alive. So that's kind of a joke around our house.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's so true. So it really resonated with me when I saw that you'd written complicated grief. And the first person that came to my mind was my mother. And she passed away. Yes. When I was, I think 33, 34, I'm trying to do the math in my head, but about 15 years ago. And it was complicated in the way that she died, in the way that she talked about her death, but also our relationship was complicated. So I really look back on, I was devastated at the loss of my brother when he died. It was sudden, it was an accident, it was just tragic. Took me a lot to deal with, but our relationship was so simple and pure. We had a great relationship. I loved him. There was no issue. So it was a very different grieving for me. It was something I could deal with and eventually accept. With my mom, what was really complicated for me, and all these years later, so I'm dealing with it 15 years later. And when you talked about professional help, I actually spoke about this with my counselor not too long ago, but a few weeks ago, to also just keep working on that closure. And I feel a lot better now, and I could certainly share some of that today too about what helped me. But my mom was an amazing woman. She adopted many kids with special needs. She raised 8 kids. She put everything she had into raising her kids. And she also was a very tough person. And we had a relationship that was conflicted. As a child, it was a very chaotic living environment. And so there were times where she may have been very strict or, said things that were unkind or cruel that were very hard for me to deal with as a young person. And then as we became adults, I didn't have that much time as an adult to spend with her where we could start talking about it. And so we never gotten to the point of resolving those issues. So it was very complicated for me because on one hand, she's like a saint. And on the other hand, she's someone that I have real concerns and issues with the way that she treated me at the same time. So it was, and it's that same kind of feeling about guilt, and just knowing that I wish we'd had a chance to talk those things out and get to that place of being complete in our relationship. So then when she passed away, she hid the nature of her illness from us. So when she died, we were really shocked by it. So she had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and she was in stage 4, but she didn't share all those details with us. So all we knew was that we knew that she was in chemotherapy. We knew that she was getting treatment, and she'd only shared with a couple of people in the family how serious it really was. Either because it was too painful for her to share that with us, or just that she, was just hopeful and wanted to, channel her positive energy, and it's her choice. And I absolutely respect that. But it was really shocking to me when she passed away. So I wasn't there that day. I'd seen her that week and I'd been with her, but I was getting back home to Buffalo to prepare in case I needed to spend more time with her later. And I'd started a new job that didn't have a lot of time. So I was just trying to manage it based on the information I had. So when I got the phone call that she passed away, I was just devastated. And I grieved because I absolutely love her, but I basically was, I think, like more suffering around, I wish that we'd had a better relationship. I wish we'd been able to talk to each other more. I felt guilty for not being there. I felt terrible that I didn't know how serious this was. So all of those things were very, very tough for me. And so I found it extremely difficult to go through. And I gravitate between just like, at Christmas or different holidays where I really miss her, or Mother's Day, sometimes feeling just pure missing her. I wish she was there. And then other times just feeling angry, like I wish that she told me, anger at the people that knew and why didn't they tell me? And those were things I had to deal with. So I ended up speaking with my counselor about it, and she just really helped me feel more closure. And that would be something I would recommend. If you can't get closure with someone when they're alive, just really do whatever type of exercise or professional help you need to do those exercises after someone's passed, just so that you can, deal with those complicated feelings.
Yes, that is so, of course, professional help. I don't think I could have, I feel like, and with my faith, God gave me my counselor for those 6 extra months. I at least had her for the 6 months after my mom passed, because I needed that professional guidance and help. I did a really deep 4-month counseling sessions with her and therapy to help me through the complicated grief, and eventually got through it and got back to school teaching and got, kind of a little sense of happiness back. And now I'm feeling great. And I feel like I did grieve, sufficiently maybe for that time, but I know there's more that's still in there that hasn't come out. And she said how important it is to get that out no matter what, because if you keep that inside, whether it's complicated like the relationship or the way that it happened, the way you're dealing with it, if you keep it inside and don't let it out, it can manifest in a way that comes back. Like she compared it to like a stage 4 cancer. It will come back like a very deep depression. So I don't want that to happen. I want to make sure, in writing this book, and probably you with your blog and what you're doing with the resilience and that talk, is just another way to get out our closure, to get closure somehow. And when you were telling me all the things that you wish you could have talked about with your mom, and I'm so sorry you didn't get to, did your counselor ever mention, and I'm just mentioning this because my counselor had me do this, just to write everything down that I felt like still needed to be said. And part of it I'm doing in this book, and you can keep that paper for yourself.
Yes, I didn't do that exercise with her, but I'd written those things down before with a different mentor. What she had me do, which was really helpful, was was basically all the things that I really felt like I needed to say and what I would want to know. Like, so she really helped me role play that conversation. So I did it in more of a role play situation. And what was so helpful was once I went through that and realized that's really all it was just that sense of, you know, some of it was, here is where I felt like you let me down, or where I feel I let you down. And it really came down to when I got through those feelings and could get through them, what I was left with was that it was really powerful for me. But basically, I've been hanging on to this notion of the way I wanted my mom to love me instead of seeing how she was loving me. So when I got through it all, I realized like my mom was a complete person. And this was a woman who she'd had to give up a baby for adoption when she was 18. Then she got married and had 2 babies and lost her husband, you know, with a baby at 6 months old. Then she remarried again, and just all the things she went through. And she's just like a really phenomenal person. And that she's a person just trying to do her best with all the kids. So when I really saw her as a woman with compassion, not this mom who there's a box of how she should be acting to me. And then I could think about like when I first brought my husband and his daughter, so I have 2 stepdaughters as well as our son. So we have the 3 kids together. The first Christmas they came, I was pregnant. We had the 3 kids. He came, she ended up making pajamas for every member of the family. And she made teenager pajamas for the girls. And she made me maternity pajamas for him, the whole family. And she would just do things like that. And I thought, you know, like, why couldn't I see that's how she loves me?
That's right.
Yes. And so it was really, so once I got through that, it was like all that just like went away, and I could just sit there and be like, I miss my mom, but a lot of that angst was resolved now.
Yeah, that is very powerful. And just knowing that just from talking to you this short period of time and getting to know your story, I know your mom loved you too. I know she probably loved you like crazy, and she made pajamas for everybody. That is a very sweet story.
Yes. Yeah. So, and that was why I think it was complicated for me too, because it was like, how can I be angry at someone who does things like that? And that's where it's those things, you can have so many different emotions with people, and it doesn't take away the good because there's something you're upset about. But it was really just a time in my life when I wasn't very good at communicating anyway. And so, you know, it's really like we got stuck at that child-parent relationship and never matured past that.
Yeah, and you can chalk it up to that, and you know, but I just feel like if your mom would, you know, if your mom was still here, I don't want this to sound bad, but it's kind of like with me, if your mom was still here, do you think we would be taking it for granted and still would not be discussing the things that we should be?
Yeah, absolutely. I at the time was definitely not seeing any indication that I was trying really hard to have these conversations with her at the time. Yeah.
Right. It's kind of, I don't know if we can give that a name, but there's so many things that I made it a point to say to my mom that I'm so thankful that I did. And I had even written an article about her, a column that had come out in our local newspaper the Mother's Day before she passed. And I'm just like, wow, that's powerful. I cannot believe I did that right before she passed. So she got to read it.
Amazing.
And there's so many things now that it sounds like you're doing that, you know, and I have a lot of one of my dear friend from New York, and she talks to me a lot. She teaches high school as well. And she teaches yoga, and she's very spiritual. And she always says all the time, she says, Theo, I don't know why you're saying that she doesn't see that or she won't know about that, because she's right there beside you. She knows. Yeah. So, you know, all of these things you're writing down or you're thinking, I just want to say that I feel like she knows, and you'll get your answers and your closure eventually. But I think it's by doing these things. And I tell people all the time, they're just like, you don't cry very much. You don't cry. Well, I cried a lot at the beginning, you know, by myself, but I didn't have the luxury of that. And now I've kind of gotten to the point where my mission is stronger than my emotion. And that's my little saying. My mission is stronger than my emotion. And my mission is to talk to people like you and put my emotion on hold. And then later, as it all comes through and the book gets into people's hands and I get to talk to more than just groups of 30 kids at a time, maybe groups of hundreds of people, then maybe I'll have some emotion about it. How are you about emotion? Are you a crier or are you a crier?
It was the first thought that came to mind was in the year after my mom passed, I cried every time I was alone in the car. So I was working, and I know, and pretty much every Christmas, because Christmas, like we celebrate Christmas in our family, and that was her thing. Like, so it was all, and nothing's been the same since she passed away, because my dad also remarried and sold the house and everything like that. So all the traditions are different. And they're so wrapped up in who she was. She was really like the glue of the family at that time. So we've all learned how to like reshape our family after her. So I would cry whenever I was alone, because otherwise I was parenting, going to work or parenting. And so I would pretty much just kind of put that to the side. And then as soon as I got in the car, put on any song that had anything nostalgic in it, especially Christmas Shoes. Like I watch that movie almost every year just to enjoy crying about it. So I didn't mention this before, but I actually wrote a children's book that's still unfinished about a girl losing her mom. So that was something that I did because I really felt like it's such an important thing that people go through, and how do you help people process that?
Now, why is that still unfinished?
Mostly just the writing process. It was like I just needed to step away.
Close?
It's so close. It's probably 2 chapters away. So I'm picking it back up now that I'm back into writing again. So yeah, so it's my goal to finish that. But as far as emotion goes, I've always been that kind of logical, rational person. I do feel things deeply, but it's very easy for me to shift into my head. And so for me, I think it's important to give myself time to feel my feelings and not bottle them up and really deal with them. And I've been learning how to communicate them much better with people. So that was definitely the situation with my mom. I can definitely say, like, we're both 2 different people bringing in our personalities into that situation. It was definitely not one-sided, because I could be a very like bottled up kind of person. So, when I look back and see it more fully as an adult, I can really see like my own part in it too.
Yeah, this is some advice for you, is to not bottle it up anymore. Keep it coming out in that blog, keep it coming out in that book, and whatever other adventures you're going to do. And thank you so much for doing the video cast with me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your story and for you reaching out, because when you do that, it just helps validate what I'm putting out there, that complicated grief. It's not just me. There's other people. And I think I've been doing some research, about 60% of the population will grieve, of the US population will grieve, or 60 to 70%. And out of that, only about 7 to 9% will experience complicated grief. So there's not a whole lot of us, but that's still a pretty big percentage.
Yes. And I think it's so good that you're doing it. It's, again, something common that people will die and we'll lose them. But I just think it's one of the most devastating things that happens to us as humans, is losing loved ones. And so anything, I know that this has taken so much of my own time and energy to deal with. And when I finally did start dealing with it, it made such a difference in my life. And so I think this will really be of help to so many people. So I think it's great you're doing it.
And thank you so much. And I think it's great that you're doing what you're doing. We're doing what we have to do to get through this. And then, hey, and then it's helping other people. So it's kind of a win-win.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Allison in New York. Bye from Texas.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.